3, 2, 1. Well, welcome back to part 2 of the Atheist Christian Book Club. We are looking this month in December at The Devil's Delusion, Atheism and Its Scientific Pretensions by David Berlinski. I've got another video clip I want to share later. I know there was some talk during the break about some of the things we've already talked about, some of Berlinski's arguments, etc. But I want to talk about, Bill and I have been talking about next month's book. This is for January. This will be January 4th. And I think that this is Bill's suggestion. I think it's a perfect complement to this book by Berlinski. It is the book, The Why Evolution is True by Jerry Coyne. And so Jerry is Dr. Coyne is also Jewish, secular Jew. So you have, we just heard from David Berlinski. Here's another guy coming along. He's a professor of ecology and evolution at the University of Chicago. So we're hearing from a PhD in the field, and he's going to be giving you know, scientific and logical reasons, evidence for why evolution is true. So again, playing off of this month's book, looking at next month, we have some flyers for you. You can take one
and
and
he gives
them.
details. The criticism of Berlinski is he criticizes, but this guy lays out his case. I was looking at Richard Dawkins' book, The Greatest Show on Earth, but I just believe this one is.
But what it made me think, it was weird. It made me think, because I'm doing a Bible study on John 2 right now. So the wedding at Cana, right? So the master of the head feast gets the water that had been made into wine from the servants. And what did Mary tell the servants? He says, whatever he says to you, do it. And the servants do it, and they take it to the head waiter. What's the head waiter say? This is really good wine. Now, how would the head waiter, not knowing where that came from, explain where that wine came from? What would he say? Oh, it was on the best hills of Judea, and it was in the dirt, and blah, blah, blah. He would give these very naturalistic, common sense explanations of how wine was. But what did the head waiter not know that the servants knew? Where that water came from and how that, what would his explanation be? Completely missing the mark. And what struck me about that passage and what we're talking about here is that it was the servants who knew where the wine came from. In other words, to know the universe, to know the cosmos, to know the singularity, to know anything about it, is to be in the service of the one who created it. And so it was the servants who understood where the wine came from and not the head waiter. And I thought that's kind of what Berlinski is saying, is that there's something topsy-turvy, first last about the universe. It's so quirky. How do we understand this? And the Gospel's answer is the servants, the fools, the poor, the blind, and the sick. Those in the service of the kingdom of the heavens are the ones who know where the heavens came from.
That's a beautiful homily. I love that.
Well, I suppose the atheist response to that would be that we have open questions, right? I mean, no one's denying that there are things that science right now can't explain.
Right.
And you can. It's a God gap thing. Once again, it seems to come back to this every week, I think. But we have it's a question of, is it better to have a answer, or is it better to have an honest I don't know answer?
Amen.
Because you can if you want, you can.
That's good.
Because we generally don't know what came before. Where,
The singularity.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's mind blowing to think we're at a point where all these laws and all of a sudden they break down, and now science doesn't know what to do with this new environment that that's.
I think, and my knowledge may be a little dated and a little thin here, but going back to the singularity, we've gotten closer. We've been able to calculate and show things out closer and closer and closer.
Was it 10 to the minus 47?
Yeah, it's Planck time that we've.
How in the world do you go back from 13.7 billion years to less than a second?
And Jim, to exactly the point what I think Berlinski is saying, not necessarily what I'm saying, but what Berlinski seems to be saying, is that going back that far, even to that aspect of what we would call Planck time, is still theoretical. I mean, what is time, right?
Right.
So what is this division of time that we have created? It is something theoretical that we have created to explain something that we can't explain. And there's nothing wrong with that. but Berlinski, I think, is pointing out this is not physical science traditionally understood. This is theoretical and outside the
Well, it
realm.
would be a model of what
It's a model. It's a model.
of
It's not
our
reality.
definition of time is a model of
Absolutely
what
right.
we
So
perceive as.
But I think that, and I think that's true. But there's actually a quote from Dawkins where he says, and I thought it is 10 to the minus 33 or 5, but he basically says that is the singularity is derived at the point where our mathematics
everything's breakdown. Yeah, there's nothing there that they can.
So I think that's a true statement. I do appreciate what you guys just said, though, because I think again, from a Christian point of view, it's refreshing to hear the atheists say, "Look, we're just trying to ask the damn questions," as opposed to say, "No, this is the way it really is," and shove it down my throat. Which I'm sure you don't appreciate when evangelicals step on your toes and say,
Well, yeah. Is that part of what Berlinski was even saying, though, that science sometimes, or some scientists try to make claims that are outside?
Yes.
Well, I mean, look at the God Delusion and half the books that those guys wrote.
I think he's taking a very kind
along
of
these
person.
lines, I have a quote from Thomas Jefferson. He said, "He who knows nothing is closer to the truth than he whose mind is filled with falsehood and errors."
Oh, that's a good one.
And the context of that was, in the Appalachian Mountains, they were finding fossil sea creatures, shells and things, and people were wondering and coming up with all kinds of wild theories where these things came from. And Jefferson admitted, "I don't know. Someday people may know, but we don't know now." And to speculate based on lack of any real evidence is worse than just saying you don't know. Well, he didn't know, and they didn't know at the time anything about plate tectonics and the rising of the mountains through the action of plate tectonics. And so now we know, we can speak, we don't have to pretend that we don't know anymore. We do know where that came from. And plate tectonics is reinforced by a number of independent observations that all fit together and explain it. Well, to say that we don't know what happened at the point of the singularity, I think we just have to say, yeah, we don't know. And I think
But does it imply, God, to you that you have a singularity in an expanding universe that is just right, that if it doesn't go fast enough, it's black holes?
Two different questions, really.
Yeah, I don't think that. So Georges Lemaitre, the Belgian priest who was primarily responsible for the cosmic egg and the whole Big Bang before Hubble confirmed it, basically, said not to say that the Bible affirms modern cosmology, because once modern cosmology changes, as it always will,
that's interesting.
that what happens to the theology that you said once buttressed this model. And so it's model building. It's not something that is paradigmatically, inflexibly ever going to change. It's model building. And so and he was a Belgian priest, and his counsel to the Pope, who was championing this idea, look, we found the proof of the Big Bang. It's like, no, don't do that. Because Davies, like I was saying, and a lot of other theoretical physicists like Alexander Vilenkin, they are still working on trying to find an eternal universe scenario. And they might. I mean, who knows what these other telescopes are going to find, and who knows what the mathematics are going to be, and who knows what the next models are going to be. But I think, to Ken and Chris's point, I'm not saying you guys are doing this by any stretch of the means, but a lot of times the response to God as the beginning and the agnosticism, again, I'm not saying you guys are doing this, but the hard agnosticism is often leveled as we can't know. There's nothing wrong with not knowing. I'm not saying you guys are doing this, but there's the hard agnosticism of we can't know, therefore we should just leave it as an unknown. But Vilenkin said in 2012 at Stephen Hawking's 70th birthday, all the data points to there being a beginning of the universe. So the idea that I think the beginning of the universe for me is solidified by my faith in Christ and what Genesis says. That's where it comes from ultimately, Matthew 16. Blessed are you, Simon Peter, because the Father has revealed this to you and not flesh and blood. That's how I feel like my faith has started, and that's the axiomatic point of which I believe.
So this confirms your
But
faith.
it does. It's a wonderful accident of, if you will, that we can have a dialogue along these lines where science does seem to align with the Christian scriptures. There are similarities in both. But that's not for me saying that the Bible affirms or that Genesis affirms Big Bang cosmology. I'm saying
vice versa.
Or vice versa. Right.
Well, yeah,
It is interesting, though, when you look at, from medieval times, at least, certainly post-Enlightenment, everybody, the worldview was steady state. I mean, that was the cosmological king of the universe, that the universe, matter can neither be created nor destroyed. That was the axiom you would hear. And so matter has always existed. The universe is static. and it was you know, a lot of ridicule for the theologians that were saying that there was a beginning. And so the very fact that, you know, Big Bang cosmology seems to point to the probability of a time in which there was no, or you even have to say the word time.
Time or space. You're
Right.
to say.
Matter, energy, space, and time did not exist before the singularity that we're able to tell. And if that's the case, it does sound awfully a lot like that it's confirming those theological statements that were made about matter, energy, space, and time.
Yeah, I absolutely believe there's no parallel there. But
If I grant you that, yes, having a beginning was something that theists believed and non-theists might not have believed, we can also point to the fact that having a beginning from a single point expanding outward over billions of years, that was not something that theists expected either. At least in the circles I grew up in, the Big Bang was ridiculed as you know, godless.
Still is with younger.
Yeah.
In some circles, yeah.
I mean, I think there was a conception that the universe was more or less static, but God just made it that way from the beginning, not from a point that grew from a Big Bang, so to speak.
Well, and even Alan Guth will say, though he's the author of the inflationary model, he will say it answers a couple of questions, but it doesn't answer everything, and in fact it creates more, because if you're going to grant inflation, you have to grant a mechanism that slows down the inflation, because it just went, you know, what put the brakes on inflation, and why did it end up yielding the temperature that it did. So it's a nice explanatory scope for how the cosmic microwave background radiation is all about the same temperature, but it introduces a whole other set of problems.
But that goes back to the second part of what Bill brought up, and that is, if you only get one bang, why does it appear so finely tuned? Like I've said before, if the rate of expansion is any greater or any less to a tiny fraction, you not only don't get the possibility of life, you don't even get the periodic table. You get hydrogen and maybe helium, and that's all you get.
Luke Barnes, Luke Barnes, he wrote A Fortunate Universe. He's in our book. He talks about the what they call the state of entropy that had to exist at the beginning of the universe. So entropy. So there's low and high entropy, and that means just a state of order. And so low entropy is a very ordered state. High entropy is like, okay, I spilled my coffee cup, the coffee's not going back into the cup and rewarming itself, the egg is broken, the shells aren't going to recapitulate into an egg again, the glass is broken. That's high entropy, state of high entropy. My bedroom and my laundry right now, high entropy. But the universe, and most cosmologists who have studied this, Barnes notes that everybody agrees that the universe, whatever it was at the beginning, had to have an extremely state of low entropy. The entropy was ridiculously low to the point where you're like, that's peculiar. Even if you don't want to go so far as to say design, it's really strange. And it has to be that way. That's just the way, in order for everything to be the way it is. It's like a bag of fireworks, right? You see those things go up, they were packed a certain way so the colors would come out in the way that they did. Only with the cosmic microwave background radiation, all the tendrils went to the four corners of the universe and remained the same temperature for the next 13.7 billion years. You know, how did that happen? You know, it's mind-boggling.
Is the only solution to that multiverse?
No. It's not. I don't even think it's really a consideration, because really what you're doing, and he has Berlinski has this. He goes back and he has this little catechism with Hawking. He turns Hawking's beliefs into a catechism on page 104 and 105. And at the end of this, and he's not making fun of it. He kind of is, but he's kind of not. You know, do that subtle humor thing. Yeah. And he's it's a catechism of quantum theory, of quantum cosmology, page 104, 105, and it ends with, how did our universe evolve from the egg? And then his answer for Stephen Hawking is, it evolved by inflating itself up from its sac to become the universe in which we now find ourselves. You may think of that as just one of those things. And then you turn the page and he says, this catechism, I should add, is not a parody of quantum cosmology, it is quantum cosmology. And so the multiverse, as everybody will know, philosophically just pushes the question of origins back a couple of steps. That's all it does. Yeah, it's taxicab fallacy.
Because if you only have one universe, if you only get one bang, to have all those parameters exactly right for us to be able to evolve into sentient beings that can observe and know these things. I mean, the odds are astronomical. But the issue you're bringing up is, if you have multiverse, you just push the question back. Well, how do you have a universe-generating machine that can create at least one universe that has all these factors in
Yeah.
it.
Well,
Now, to
I'd
your
like to think of an analogy along those lines. There was a time when we didn't know whether there were planets around other stars, right?
10 years ago,
209 or something like that.
20, yeah.
Anyway, so it's not all that long ago that we didn't know whether there were planets around other stars. But scientists looking at the fortuitous placement of the Earth around the sun, in such a way that life can be supported, surmised that we must be just one of a gazillion number of planets in the universe, and we just happen to be in the right place. 99.9% of the planets in the universe are not, well positioned like we are, but there's nothing odd about that, because there's so many out there.
Yeah, I understand that. That's a good point. If you have enough, I think there's tons of things. I think initially there were like 9 factors to make life possible on a planet, and that's quickly multiplied into several hundred.
Yeah, I mean,
things.
20 years ago.
But given enough billions of stars and enough trillions of planets out there potentially,
Yes.
then you're going to, somebody's going to win. More than one's going to win the lottery.
30 years ago, somebody might have scoffed at people who proposed that there were trillions of planets out there and said, well, where's the evidence for it? But lo and behold, now we know there is.
And
Well, if you put it back to the singularity, it gets back to you don't have billions, you have one singularity.
Right.
But
and all
for the
those factors
multiverse,
would be right.
I'm building an analogy.
Okay.
This is a parable. So people scoff and say, well, where's the evidence for a multiverse? Well, it's a supposition, just like having the supposition that there's trillions of planets in the universe is a supposition based on the fact that we can't be just that lucky.
Is it a supposition built only to explain the entropic principle?
You mean the planets?
That's all it came from.
No, multiverse. Is a multiverse simply there to try to explain how one universe got so
Well,
lucky?
if you walk along a beach and you find an apple, you've never seen an apple before, you don't know what this is it more economical to think that there's only one of these in the universe, or is it more economical to think if there's one, there could be others? I don't know. It's not unreasonable, in other words, to think that our universe should be.
No,
I didn't know the answer to that question. I was just wondering. I'm sure there may be other purposes for theorizing multiverse besides that.
Richard Carrier raised something about the inflationary theory does predict a multiverse. So if inflationary theory is testified by the evidence, then it follows that it's more likely that there is a multiverse.
So
I don't know the details.
So multiverse, and showing my ignorance here, multiverse would mean that there may be multiple outside of our universe. There could be multiple other ones versus the multiple dimension.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So this is saying there could be multiple. I mean, there could be
With
untold
different-
number of them.
Yeah.
Different
Creating
physical
other
laws.
universe, and maybe ours bumps into one time or something like
That's
that.
one of the theories.
Okay.
Like you might be on one of those universes.
But
another you.
I think you can say this.
That's what they say.
Economically, I will confess, I'm not saying my critique of it or my observation of what it is not to say that they don't exist. I'm saying that even if they did exist, the explanation for where they're coming from is just a bigger problem of where we came from. It's still the problem. So there can be, just like I'm not throwing out multiverses, but we still need a multiverse thing.
Hey, you guys believe
Generator.
You guys believe in supernova explosions? It takes 2 supernova explosions to form the heavier elements, like iron.
That's the current theory. That we don't know where else the heavier elements in the periodic would come from. So supernova forges that.
Are you good with that?
Yeah, I mean we know that. I mean they can study a supernova and see the elements that are coming out of these things.
Spectrum.
So absolutely. Now, does that mean that the elements that we have on Earth and all the things that Earth and us? Did that mean we come from star stuff like Sagan and everybody else says? Are we star stuff? Well, there's carbon in stars and there's carbon in us. But the explanatory scope of going from supernova to human sentience is, that's a leap. But yeah, there's no question that the heavier elements do come out of a supernova.
But so in the beginning was hydrogen. You pretty much are good
Yeah.
to go there, right?
Yeah, you
don't
have
need
hydrogen and
non-
helium in the beginning. That's all you have. So you don't have stars making the heavier elements. So you need population 3 stars, which are hydrogen helium stars. The problem with hydrogen and helium stars, population 3 stars, is they don't exist. There's no evidence for them, but they are required for stars that we have today as presently the only plausible explanation that these helium hydrogen stars explode do their supernova thing. So it's like popcorn in the early universe. Stars just form.
So they don't
and explode.
exist, or we can't, because we can see the cosmic.
We don't see any signatures of hydrogen or helium. So there's no hydrogen, helium,
Okay.
pure hydrogen, helium stars.
Is that
exist
because
that
we
know.
can't look back that far yet, or do the analysis
Well,
that far back yet, or is that?
That may be one limitation, but in
Okay.
our immediate area that we can survey to stars, because the Hubble Ultra Deep Field has a galaxy that's the farthest imaged of any object, and I think that's at a redshift of like 11.9 or something. So we can look pretty far back,
Right.
and the farther back in time we go, what we're finding are structures of things, of superstructures of galaxies that shouldn't be there, simply because of where they appear on the time scale of cosmological development. So there's no trace of the population 3 stars. Now you can find hydrogen and helium in various places, but for all the abundance of the hydrogen and helium stars that are said to have existed prior to the early universe and the creation of heavier stars, they're just not there. And so they need the supernovas of these population 3 stars to form the heavier elements, to form the stars that are now forming heavier elements that are made of more stuff. So that the stellar evolution, that's one of the greatest mysteries, one of the unsolved mysteries. I'm not saying, God of the gaps, God did it, but it is a great mystery that is kind of sold to the public like we figured this all out.
Right.
Like, look at the Eagle Nebula, look at these little clouds with lights inside of them.
I bought.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't do any more digging.
They're just dust clouds of stars forming. And so it's the same kind of thing that we take a classification scheme of stars and we line them up and we go, okay, red, yellow, blue, young, middle age, old, and we make these assumptions based on their chemical elements, their size, how they burn fuel. So like blue stars, they're the SUVs of the universe because they burn fuel so fast, they're bright and they're huge, but they're not said to last very long because they burn fuel so much. But the universe is filled with them. And so the hypothesis is that they must have been generated recently. Technetium in the heliosphere of larger stars. Technetium is something that only has a half-life of a certain few million years. What's it doing in supergiant old red stars? How did technetium, with such a short half-life, end up in the atmosphere of these old stars? There's a ton of mysteries out there about stellar formation.
But are
Just
you
about
letting
star
God in to help the galaxies?
Bill, I am of the belief that pretty much God created it as we see it, and it has been declining ever since. I don't particularly believe in stellar evolution.
Okay.
And when I say evolution, I don't use it in a Darwinian term. I just mean natural development. I think there's a lot of mystery there. Maybe it's true. We just don't have all the.
But
pieces.
you're older of creationists, right?
I don't have an age. I'm an Earth age agnostic. I have no idea how deep.
So you believe in the Big Bang?
Huh?
But you believe in the Big Bang?
I think there are some parts that it can't explain. There's some things that it cannot. So no, I
Why
don't.
be agnostic when you look at the stars, the distant stars, and how much light travel?
Because, to be cheeky with you, Ken, I had a Hubble Space Telescope scientist in my car for 3 hours as I took him to the airport, and I was asking these very questions. And he goes, Dan, what do you think? How old's the universe? I'm like, well, if you look at the universe, it looks old. If you look at the Bible, it looks young. He's like, that's my position.
I would say at least 63 years old.
But seriously, Ken, what he did tell me was something. What he did tell me. So imagine you have a 12-foot ceiling and you have an attic up there, and he's like, okay, so I have I have 2 6-foot ladders. Well, if you stack a ladder on top of a ladder, it gets a little bit more precarious. You could do it, and he said this is exactly the problem with distance. The farther away we are looking, the harder it is to construct a relatively stable line of measurement to know exactly. So that's when you see galaxies that are super distant, you see plus or minus billions of years or millions of years. There's a huge wiggle room the farther out something is about distance. So Dr. Kokomor said, it doesn't mean that we're wrong. It just means that the farther out we go, we have to string tape measures together, and that becomes a little precarious.
So I'll share something with you guys, and I'm sure about everybody will object to this. But one of the issues with a lot of these theories in the evolutionary theory and all of the space evolution that we follow, again, this idea that there is a progression, are all based upon the concept of time and a continuity of formula that says that logic and formula all have a continuity to them. But the issue is, and this was raised by a French philosopher, Henri Bergson, at the turn of the century, and what you may have to understand, and this is a little difficult, but there is no such thing as time.
Yeah, I would say prove time.
Time is 100% an abstract construction of our minds, okay? There is only the present, okay? And so when you look at that, you begin to look scientifically at the issue of change. And what really needs to be studied is why things change and how they change. And all of this work about how many billion years and what it took and all this stuff is a false conundrum. Because if you really want to solve what's happened, all you got to do is figure out why and how things change. Now that may have to do with atoms, it may have to do with the electromagnetic field, it may have to do with a lot of the components and things that are what things are. But the issue is change. And we constantly get off track whenever we bring time into the equation. So I just offer that for you guys to think about.
So ignoring the question of time, if we're concerned with why and how things change and what is the issue with evolution, because that's literally what evolution is. It's literally what it's trying to explain how species change, how they develop, whether it's over millions of years or billions of years, that's still...
But we know, for example, now with some of the DNA research, that we can take that DNA inside an egg and we can have a chicken that's born with a tail. It's as soon as that ingestion period is done. That's immediate. So the idea that, you know, dinosaurs evolved from this and birds from all this stuff, it may be irrelevant. It could have happened in a freaking day or 8 months, but the issue is not time. The issue is change.
But the change to do that seems inconsistent with the type of change we witness in generation to generation, right? So the 30,000 out of how many ever variations that the average human has are the same. I'm sure there's a standard variation in each generation of whatever creature we're talking about.
Yeah, you're right.
And so if you compare that for a chicken and then you look at what DNA modifications were made in the egg to cause that, I suspect that to do that is multitudes more change than what the average chicken would go from generation to
You
generation.
can even prompt teeth in chicken by activating some inactive
Exactly.
genes.
Let's do this. Let me
so
do this
maybe-
real quick. We got one
Yeah.
more clip that I think is going to generate some more conversation. I don't want to take us too late.
was
This
gonna
is
say
about
controversy.
8 minutes. This is back at the Socrates in the City. I think this is Eric Matassis' group there in New York, and this is David Berlinski again. You ready?
One of the dominant convictions urged upon the human race by the scientific community concerns a certain myth. That the progress of science, which is real, which is very powerful, which is very significant, no one should doubt it, has meant progressively a disenchantment with nature and a form of cultural humiliation whereby at every step in the development of the sciences, human beings and their works have been demoted from a central position and reduced to the margins. Apparently, Stephen Jay Gould, for example, argues this. This process began in the 16th century with the discovery that in fact, the Earth is not the center of the universe. It continued step by step over the course of 3 centuries. And it reached an apogee with Darwin and the discovery that, in fact, human beings are nothing but a continuation, squalid enough, of the animal kingdom, cousin and kin to every shambling and repulsive thing that lives, and hardly distinguished from the great apes except for the acquisition of a few adventitious characteristics of no particular significance. Get used to it. Now this, I think, has been drummed into popular consciousness with absolutely no interruption. Each step of this progression is, of course, absurd. No one who believes that the Earth is the center of the universe is prepared to make purely a geographical argument. Home is where the heart is, not where geography points. And if we say that the Earth is the center of the universe, we mean something quite different than the geometrical center. The supposed demotion of human beings as being created in the image of God proceeds by means of the ascent of an inferential staircase that any thinking person can see is on the verge of collapse. For example, Stephen Jay Gould is... I admire Stephen Jay Gould, I must say that. I think he was a sensitive and intelligent writer, but he said some lamentably foolish things. He said that the insistence, as I would insist, on a difference in kind and not simply in degree between us and the great apes is simply a mark of our cosmic arrogance, an inability to let go. But in fact, any cursory examination of the great apes and human beings reveal profound and striking differences, not only in the organism itself, biomechanically, physically, biochemically, but above all in its nature and soul. Here's a simple operational test, which I've mentioned many times to the community of evolutionary biologists. You're having trouble distinguishing a difference in kind rather than degree between you and a chimpanzee. Here's a simple test. The chimps are on the other side of the cage. You're not. It's quick, it's effective, it's operational, and it's infallible. Chimpanzees don't talk, they don't do mathematics, they don't speculate, they don't dream, they don't cook, they can't clean up after they make a mess, they dine inadvertently, they don't dance, they don't do music, they can't play an instrument. What more do you want as a difference in kind rather than degree? What more do you want? But there's an underlying, much more powerful argument. We know that human beings have some striking properties, and we know that the idea that a human being is not simply an animal has a very rich history, a very long tradition, and it seems to resonate very clearly with something in the human soul. According to Darwinian theory, even the psychological, the social, the cultural, and the religious attributes of the human being were introduced into the inanimate world in precisely the same way as any other biological structure. That is, incrementally by a process of random variation and natural selection. This is, if not holy writ, then certainly holy dogma. Alfred Wallace, who discovered the theory of evolution a little before Charles Darwin, was struck by this. He couldn't quite reconcile what he understood with what he was claiming. In that respect, he was a very honest scientist, very penetrating intelligence. He said, look, you go to the Amazon forest. You take an Amazonian headhunter, age of 6 months, family of headhunters. You move them to Oxford in England. Give them a classical English education. The children of the Amazonian headhunters will be in all respects indistinguishable from other graduates of Oxford. That is to say, they'll speak perfect English, they'll have a wonderful ethnic advantage that they can use in acquiring positions at the BBC, namely that they're headhunters. They will be able to do mathematics, they can learn medicine, if they wish to dance, they can do anything they want. But Wallace said the remarkable thing is, human life, unlike chimpanzee life, human life seems to offer us this very suggestive account of unopened gifts in the human community. Now, of all these marvelous properties that human beings have, developed in this way, how is it that we can go to an Amazonian community or the community of Eskimos and we can discover these gifts waiting and dying to be used? If those gifts are part of the human inheritance, they are not Darwinian. And if they are Darwinian, they are not there, because unused gifts have no role to play in the struggle for survival. After all, speaking with a polished BBC accent does a headhunter no good. This has been called Wallace's problem in the literature. And of course, biologists are happy to call it Wallace's problem because it sounds so much safer than saying human beings are created in the image of God. That cannot be said, even though it comes to the same conclusion.
What do y'all think? What did Berlinski mean when he talked about unopened gifts?
That genetically speaking, there was nothing in the headhunter clan or biological disposition that would be labeled Oxford scholar. There's nothing innately there in the physical, chemical constituency of these people that would show that they could do that, except that they're human. But there's, naturally speaking, there's nothing there, naturalistically speaking.
And evolution couldn't have given this gift because it has in the Amazonian jungle it has
There's no
there's no
advantage
benefit
for
for
them
healthy,
speaking British.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to go get hunting. I'm
Well-
going to go get a few heads at the market today, yeah.
Well, that also
I mean,
assumes an arrogance that an Oxford British lifestyle is more advantageous to
No,
somebody.
not at all. No, I think his point is that even if he could, it would be of no distinction in naturalism. Whether you could speak it, or whether you could speak Texan, or whether you could speak Hebrew, or whatever, that would be absolutely no advantage to you. You name it. You put your own dialect in there. There's no advantage for them in that state to be speaking that way.
But we're
as
all
long as you
of
say
the
the
same-
Amazon jungle,
As long as you keep them there.
Right.
yeah,
Then
then those skills are not helpful or
right.
beneficial at all.
Yeah.
Right, and we have skills
No alphabet.
likewise that we've been taken at birth and thrown in the Amazon.
Right.
We
Yeah.
have skills that would likewise be developed to help us live that lifestyle, or the
But we
Eskimos or
wouldn't
whatever.
need to cook, or we wouldn't need to philosophize or read books and go to college.
So the question, maybe a little differently, is why would a random materialistic, environmental controlled evolution develop an intellectual capacity that exists? Because that's a cost that you wouldn't think would
Well,
be
it's
required.
a generality. We're malleable. We have malleable intelligence that allows us to set traps for animals cleverly. But that same ability that helps their survival in the jungle can be applied to different contexts to send a rocket to the moon or whatever. I mean, it's the same logical mechanism or hardware that's being used for different purposes.
We also have to, I think we would have to include the length of time. How variant are we in our DNA compared to somebody in the jungle or some of these
Well,
remote things?
My
We're
wife
not
and I've
that
been
far.
watching. Have any of you seen Naked and Afraid
Oh goodness.
or Naked and Afraid XL?
It sounds terrible.
It's like, well, it's basically taking people who are, college educated, intelligent people and putting them with nothing. I mean, they do give them a thing like a knife and a fire starter, and that's what you've got. You have no clothes, nothing, and you find out that, wow, it's a modern human is not very well adapted to be able to survive in that environment, in the Amazon or wherever.
I think the curious question for me for natural selection has always been the narrative of survivability. As if, and I'm not saying that I know the doctrine doesn't say that naturalism comes front-loaded with this instinct to survive, but when things are explained in terms of naturalistic, why biological mechanisms do what they do, the telos, the teleological aspect of this always comes back to they're trying to. There's that language of compel. They're being compelled to survive, but.
Because survival is necessary for reproduction.
Yeah,
I
so
think
why
so.
do they reproduce to survive? Why do they survive? Because they're reproducing. It's a tautology.
There is
but-
no-
But there's
there
I
is
know there's no
end.
point
Yeah.
to natural selection.
I like to use an analogy. Imagine that you have a car and it's attached to a winch or a come-along that can only go one way, and it's on an incline. It's pointed upwards, and there's a hailstorm that comes along. The hail is beating the car down, but some of the pellets propel it ever so slightly upward. But it can only go up because the come along is a ratchet that can only allow movement in one direction. If you wait long enough, it will move up the incline without any telos. It's just doing that because of the.
But there's this
But there's
obvious
the-
design there.
But this is what we're talking about earlier with the paradigmatic language that is brought into evolutionary explanations. Always has some intelligent factor involved with it to make the metaphor. This is what Paul Davies was arguing. Let's get rid of the purposeful, sentient, teleological language altogether. But when you come down to explaining natural selected things, there's always some sort of analogy. So to take your analogy, I would have to do away with the intelligence of the wench in the car completely.
Well, the ratchet, yes, is an analogy, but it's instantiated through death and reproduction. If you have death and variation in reproduction, it is like a ratchet, exactly like a ratchet. But yeah, you have to explain how life got started to begin with, and that's a separate question. But assuming that life is there, you are going to have a ratchet effect. It's only going to be able to move in the direction of better suitability for the environment.
Yeah, but I still have to. I'm still sort of wed to the idea that I have to build my metaphor on something that has been designed.
Well, again, I'm granting.
You know what I'm saying.
If you accept my premise to begin with, that life exists, then you are in a world where there's a ratchet effect that is moving it ever forward to adapt to the environment.
But do you think that forward thing is a mythos of natural selection? There's no forward, backward, left, or right, right?
Okay, you're right, and I take that back. What I mean is moving forward in the sense that it's more adapted to the environment in which it's a part. I don't mean up the ladder. I mean able to survive in the environment that it's a part of.
So is survivability the sort of the apogee of natural selection, or is that just metaphorical language, or what is there? So it seems like, so to me, like if I want to survive or if I want to die, there's absolutely no qualitative distinction between the two things in terms of whether I want to keep my biology going or whether I want to end it. It seems like I might be helpful to do both.
The only ones that survived are the ones that happen to.
Yeah, I think that's what he's saying.
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, there's no qualitative distinction between whether I die or survive.
The
right.
world
But
will be populated with the ones that survive.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
I think what he's saying is if let's say that out of 1,000 different species, only 10% have this gene or whatever to want to survive. Well, they're the only ones that can reproduce. So the others are going to be eliminated just because they don't have this survival instinct to them. So it's almost whatever is what ought.
It's just
so
like
capability more than
like
instinct.
urban legends. You know, there's probably 100 urban legends that are created for every one that actually becomes viral. And the people who create a viral one don't necessarily know that it's going to become viral. It just has certain characteristics that certain brains find attractive and they want to pass it on. Like the one with the Facebook thing that says, oh, you know, you've created a duplicate copy of your, or a second copy of your account. I'm warning you. So everybody gets afraid and they pass that on. That was kind of a lark. They may not have realized that was going to become viral. There wasn't any. There was a little bit of telos in that, granted. So the analogy breaks down, but it didn't have to be telos. It's more of just happenstance. This particular meme or this particular text becomes viral, whereas 99 others don't.
I haven't read it yet, but the selfish gene, does he deal with that? Is that what the selfish gene is? I haven't read it, so I'm not sure what he's talking about in that.
What a lousy book.
Oh, you didn't care for it?
There's logical contradictions on about every other damn page of that.
Yeah. But what was the selfish gene? What was he saying? Was that the mechanism to want to survive?
He's trying to explain. I read it so long ago.
Okay.
But he's trying to explain how the genes are involved in the selection process.
Well, wasn't there this raging debate between Stephen Jay Gould and Dawkins about phenotype, genotype, and where evolution does its business?
Yeah, I guess so.
That does natural selection work at the genetic level mostly, or does it work at the environmental external level mostly? Where does the evolutionary mechanism business get done? Inside the species or outside in the environment?
It was a combination of the
well,
randomness inside and how well it was able to survive in the environment it found itself
So when you
in.
say natural selection, granted it's another model, Where, so like, is that a fifth fundamental force? And if so, where does it occur mostly? Where is it? Where is this thing that we call natural selection? It's like time. It's not something we see. We see the effects of something we're calling natural selection. But is it working mostly at the genetic level, the genotype, or is it working mostly at the phenotype? Is it a combination of both? That's where Dawkins and Gould were like boxers in a ring in WWE.
Yeah, it also makes, I think, a lot of mistakes in confusing, and again, I may have this wrong, but evolution, which is leading to a certain type of change, is not the same as adaptation.
Yeah.
And a lot of our capabilities as species have self-adapting mechanisms, which is a hell of a question. Like, how the hell did that come about? But the issue is that self-adaptation is not an evolution of species. It's just a capability that exists within that.
So Neil, you would say that the finch's beaks are adaptation and not evolution?
Probably, yeah. They're adapted. And the fact is, again, if you look at the genes and some of the structure that they're coming up with, and the integrated system that exists, they're saying that's an engineered capability.
Yeah.
Adaptation is an engineered capability.
Well, guys, we've only got about 4 weeks to get this thing settled. So we've got our next book. We're going to come back in January. That's going to be January 4th, Friday. We're going to be talking about why evolution is true. We have some homework to do on that. I'll get a text or email out to you with where you can get the book, and I think it's available in audio as Audible as well. And I highly recommend that. If the books that are available on Audible, sometimes it really helps to be reading and listening at the same time. And with the Kindle app, you can do that now. Have both of those things going at the same time. If I have time to do both, that's my favorite way of doing it. So I want to thank you for being part of the Atheist Christian Book Club. I tell people it's friendly and usually respectful for the most part. So I think this one held up to that. Interesting conversation and discussion. So any final thoughts or questions before we dismiss?
One thing I want to say is I know a lot of times what I hear from some of my atheist friends, and I know from my Christian friends, and I've thought this in the past, is the other side just is ignoring the information. They're just ignoring the data. Like, obviously evolution is true because that's what science says, or obviously Christianity is true because, well, that's what the Bible says. Both of those are circular. But what I see here is that we disagree, but I don't think that the opposite side is ignoring the information. I think they're just interpreting it differently. And at points, like you, Ken, and Chris brought up, you say on your side, I actually just don't know. Like, my theory doesn't hold that answer yet. Maybe one day it'll be explained. And on the Christian side, I think we have to do the exact same thing. Well, I don't know. It seems like something God would have done, but I don't know that he did it. But not to say, well, they're just ignoring the information. So it's just a different, obviously, there's some of the information that I don't have. I know that for a fact, that I'm ignorant of some information. But I'm not specifically like, la, 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 no, that science stuff is all garbage. I just only believe philosophy in my heart and just follow it wherever. But just, I think that's something that, some understanding that I've gained while being here, and hopefully we all have, that we're not just ignoring, we're just trying to interpret and trying to figure out, and both cases seem to be cumulative cases, not open shut. So,
as I've said before, as a Christian, I really enjoy this time together. It challenges me. It makes, I think it makes me a better thinker. I'm shaken sometimes on some things and have to take another look at it and go into some more detail, modify the way I've looked at things in the past. But I think that's a benefit, not a liability. I think that occasionally the Christians also ask some good questions, and it's really, like I said, although we're on opposite sides of the issue, the remarkable thing is every one of us at the club realize this is the issue. Everything revolves around this question, and obviously one of us right and one of us wrong on that, but it doesn't diminish the importance of that question. And thank you for giving up your Friday evenings once a month to be part of this and the reading. And Bill and I, as the co-founders of this group, wanted to say thank you for being a part.
Yeah, great discussion, guys.
Thank you
this
so
was
much.
Fantastic. That's what I really enjoyed.
See you next month.
Yeah.
Thank you.